With so many conflicts, problems, and wars, besides the Ukraine and Russian war, it's no wonder that this earth is really all discombobulated and full of violence, and there's always some kind of conflict somewhere. So we need to ask the question again, will there ever be real peace on this earth? I know that for my part, personally, I will have real peace coming July 11th when God will put me to sleep, and that way I don't have to deal with my fastidious and odious wife and all the people that surround me on this earth. That's when I'll have real peace. So please join me on part 2 of this podcast. Will there ever be real peace on the earth? The New Radio Church of God and the Plain and Simple Truth Ministries present the Messenger of the Lord with Apostle Yeshua, preaching the gospel of the good news of the kingdom of God and informing you about world events in the light of Bible prophecy and preparing the way for the return of Jesus Christ. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Apostle Yeshua. Secular leaders hope for a deal. Political leaders have long hoped for a deal. There has been political pressure leveled at both the Israelis and Palestinians to make a deal. In 2015, a RAND study attempted to quantify the economic benefits if Israel and the Palestinians would make a truly successful peace deal. June 8, 2015, Jerusalem. Israelis and Palestinians would gain billions of dollars from making peace with each other, while both would face daunting economic losses in case of other alternatives or situations, particularly in case of a return to violence, according to a new study released recently. The RAND Corporation, a US-based non-profit research organization, interviewed some 200 officials from the region and elsewhere during more than 2 years of research into the cost of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Its main finding was that following a peace agreement, Israelis stood to gain $120 billion over the course of a decade. The Palestinians would gain $50 billion, making a 36% rise in their average per capita income, the report said. In contrast, the Israeli economy will lose some $250 billion in foregone economic opportunities in a return to violence, and the Palestinians would see their per capita gross domestic product fall by as much as 46%, the report said. The findings are in line with long-time arguments that peace is in the economic interest of both sides. We hope our analysis and tools can help Israelis, Palestinians, and the international community understand more clearly how present trends are evolving and recognize the costs and benefits of alternatives to the current destructive cycle of action, reaction, and inaction, said C. Ross Anthony, co-leader of the study and director of RAND's Israeli-Palestinian Initiative. The study looked into 5 different scenarios: a 2-state solution, a coordinated unilateral withdrawal, an uncoordinated unilateral withdrawal, nonviolent resistance, and a violent uprising. Not surprisingly, the economic benefit for both sides dropped considerably in each alternative scenario down the ladder. Some of the elements of the nonviolent resistance scenario are already unfolding, with Palestinians taking actions to put economic and international pressure on Israel. The study found that Israelis could lose about $80 billion and Palestinians could lose about $12 billion relative to current trends. But compared with a 2-state solution, losses from the nonviolent resistance scenario become even more dramatic, about $200 billion for the Israelis and $60 billion for the Palestinians. RAND teams are currently in the region, presenting their findings to both Israeli and Palestinian officials. The study was funded by an independent donor, and the Jesuit think tank insisted it was not advocating, just providing tools for world leaders to make good decisions. In reaching their conclusions, researchers devised a cost of conflict calculator that factors in issues like Israel's defense budget, its trade relations, and what it would cost to relocate West Bank settlers. For Palestinians, variable costs included potential destruction of property, freedom of movement, and more banking regulations. The Palestinians seek the West Bank and Gaza Strip as part of their future state, yet numerous rounds of peace talks have been unsuccessful. A two-state solution produces by far the best economic, financial outcomes for both Israelis and Palestinians, said Charles Rice, co-leader of the study and an executive at RAND. In a decade, the average Israeli would see his or her income rise by about $2,200 versus a $1,000 gain for Palestinians, compared with our projection for present trends. But that only works out to 5% for each Israeli versus 36% for the average Palestinian, meaning that Israelis will have far less and Palestinians far more economic incentive to move toward peace. RAND spokesman Jeffrey Hayday said copies of the study have been sent to officials on both sides of the conflict, including the Israeli Prime Minister's office and to the Foreign Ministry and the Palestinian Finance Ministry. There is no doubt that war, terrorism, and violent conflict hurts not only the economy, but everyday life, especially in Israel. It must also be concluded that Israeli and Palestinian leaders realize this. However, since it takes both sides to have peace, it remains elusive there. While the USA is likely to be involved in the peace deal, in August 2018, the Palestinians rejected then US President Donald Trump's deal of the century as worthless. Both the Israelis and the Palestinians are not currently willing to give up enough for a deal, despite economic and international pressures to do so. However, according to biblical prophecy, a type of peace deal will come to the region before Jesus returns. Neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians will like the deal very much, and the reality is that it will not end well for Israel. Lands that Israel currently claims will end up under control by those who are currently in opposition to Israel according to the Bible. In 2011, a plan was proposed that had a time period. A temporary deal will be more likely to get approval by both the Israelis and the Palestinians, though it will likely be a deceptive one, according to Daniel 11:22-27. An 8-year-old Middle East deal was also in the news in 2015. The Jesuit-ruled World Council of Churches also has its own peace plan, which is consistent with that of the Pope and the United Nations. Pope Francis told Germans that peace requires many to agree on different faiths. Here's what he said on May 10, 2018, and I quote, "Peace continues to grow also when Christians of many different confessions manifest themselves publicly united in their witness to Christ and commit themselves together in society because Christ is our peace," according to Ephesians 2:14. Peace requires the respectful coexistence of all people of goodwill of all religions and of all confessions. The equitable participation of all men and women in the welfare of their society is a foundation of lasting peace. However, the equal participation of all also applies to all men of all societies throughout the world. The great help of the Church and of the associations and many parishes make a valuable contribution in this area. We also look to Mary, who as Mother of the Church has prayed together with the apostles for the coming of the Holy Spirit. May Mary accompany and support our search for peace. I cordially impart my apostolic blessing to those of you who have gathered in Munster and to other faithful of God's people in Germany. Pope's message for 101st German Catholic Convention in Munster. The Pope expects the Vatican to be involved in major peace deals. Expect the Vatican to be involved in the endorsement of the Daniel 9:27 deal. And a partial area 3-year deal was proposed in 2018. Notice something about it. November 4th, 2018. On Saturday, a Hamas-affiliated media released a draft of what they claim is a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. If such an agreement is signed, it could theoretically end the hostilities on Israel's southern border. On Saturday, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Sharm el-Sheikh as part of Egypt's efforts to negotiate a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. If signed by both sides, the agreement will be binding for 3 years. The ceasefire was also reported by Palestinian News Al-Quds, which described the agreement as an exchange of quiet for quiet and staged incentives. Though Hamas ousted the Palestinian Authority in 2007 and rules in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority is included in the proposed peace deal. Hadashat News analyst Ehud Jari explained. ZC is presuming Abbas to back the plan for calm by agreeing to pay salaries and to take the responsibility for Qatar passing funds to Hamas leaders in the Strip, Jari said. The Hamas-affiliated Lebanese newspaper Al-Akhbar published Saturday an initial draft of the ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel, including 10 provisions, with every provision constituting a condition for the next one. The clauses of the draft are as follows. Number 1. Hamas will restrain the riots along the Gaza border fence, punishing protesters violating the terror organization's orders. Number 2. Cessation of Monday's weekly demonstrations, including the flotillas embarking from Gaza towards the Strip's naval border with Israel in northern Gaza near Kibbutz Zikim. Number 3. The continuation of the March of Return campaign in its nonviolent manner until the end of the year. Number 4. Egypt will work to lift 70% of the siege imposed on Gaza until the complete termination of the riots. 5. Gaza's fishing zone will increase up to 14 nautical miles. 6. The Strip's crossings will open permanently and 5,000 Gazans under the age of 40 will be granted work permits allowing them to be employed in Israel. Number 7. Egypt will work to implement the proposed prisoner exchange deal between Hamas and Israel, on which currently negotiations talks are not being held. 8. A calm of at least 3 years of tensions on the Gaza border under international supervision under the auspices of the United Nations and Russia. Number 9. A permanent opening of the Rafah crossing and additional crossings for transferring goods into Gaza in order to support the Strip's power station and infrastructures. Number 10. Launching projects meant to provide 30,000 workplaces for universities graduates in Gaza. The draft is yet to be finalized since both sides are still holding negotiation talks. It is the 8th point that caught my attention for 2 reasons. First, it is a time deal, a deal with a time limit. Hamas and the Palestinians do not wish to permanently give up the rights to go for what they want. This is very consistent with the deal of Daniel 9:27. Second, the deal involves the United Nations and Russia. In other words, an international peacekeeping, or in this case, peace monitoring force, looks to be involved. That brings to mind the following words of Jesus. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Luke 21:20 through 22. While the proposed ceasefire puts forces on the Gaza border, it is not much of a stretch to realize that a deal in the future involving Jerusalem would put armies there. Therefore, because it involves a time limit and outside forces, the Hamas plan looks to be a possibly precedent for what will happen in Daniel 9:27. The Europeans expect to be part of any peace deal and will be involved in the Daniel 9:27 deal. Notice also the following. Europe must stand by the two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. High-ranking former European politicians urge the EU to reject any U.S. Middle East peace plan unless it is fair to Palestinians. 14 April 2019. We are reaching out at a critical point in time in the Middle East as well as in Europe. The EU has very heavily invested in the multilateral, rules-based international order. International law has brought us the longest period of peace, prosperity, and stability our continent has ever enjoyed. For decades, we have worked to see our Israeli and Palestinian neighbors enjoy the peace and the dividends that we Europeans had through our commitment to that order. In partnership with previous U.S. administrations, Europe has promoted a just resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the context of a two-state solution. To this day, despite subsequent setbacks, the Oslo Agreement is still a milestone of transatlantic foreign policy cooperation. Unfortunately, the current U.S. administration has departed from long-standing U.S. policy and distanced itself from established international legal norms. It has so far recognized only one side's claims to Jerusalem and demonstrated a disturbing indifference to Israeli settlement expansion. It is, of course, most preferable for Europe to be working in tandem with the U.S. to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as to address other global issues in a strong transatlantic alliance. However, in situations in which our vital interests and our most fundamental values are at stake, Europe must pursue its own course of action. Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories are sliding into a one-state reality of unequal rights. This cannot continue for the Israelis, for the Palestinians, or for us in Europe. So this letter was signed by 37 current and former political leaders in Europe. Yes, many leaders in Europe want Europe to be involved in the deal and under European, not necessarily American terms. The Palestinians also want Europe to be involved. 29 August 2019, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called for Europe to play a greater role and function in the currently proposed Middle East peace process. German Chancellor Angela Merkel called on Thursday for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestine conflict, even if this goal is increasingly difficult to achieve. Speaking alongside Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Berlin, Merkel said that Palestinians and Israelis must be able to live side by side in peace and security. The Palestinians have cut off relations with the United States and they no longer view Washington as a neutral arbiter. Germany, on the other hand, has taken huge efforts to support a multilateral approach instead of unilateral imposition, Abbas said. Therefore, we demand that these peace negotiations fall under an international umbrella composed of a quartet of European states and Arab states to guide talks between Israelis and Palestinians, Abbas said. Euronews reported, "It's the right time for the EU to step in and bring peace to the Middle East." February 23, 2023. Let's face it, for all efforts and money spent, the European Union has been a junior partner in the now nearly non-existent Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Two circumstances might force the EU to go beyond playing solely a supportive role. First, the ultranationalist makeup and the policy that goes with it, or the new Netanyahu government. Secondly, there is a limited capacity of the United States to offset a descent into chaos of Israeli-Palestinian relations, a prospect that New York Times columnist and Middle East veteran Thomas Friedman has dubbed the one big mess solution. Can the EU pick up the slack? Only Israelis and Palestinians can bring peace between themselves, but they can do it with some help. In the Middle East, as elsewhere, Washington needs to rely more on European support. The time has come for the EU to give it a try by partnering not only with the US, but also with regional players. Clearly, the stage is being set for European involvement in a Middle East peace deal consistent with Daniel 9:26 through 27. I will continue this subject in another podcast, so look out for part 3 of this very fascinating and interesting topic, please. Until next time, this is Apostle Yeshurun saying, goodbye, friends. You have heard the messenger of the Lord with Apostle Yeshurun, preparing the way for the return of Jesus Christ. For more information on this podcast and this program, you may write us by email at Yeshurun, Apostle of the Lord, at AOL.com. Again, that is Yeshurun, Yeshurun, Apostle of the Lord, at AOL.com. This podcast was sponsored by the New Radio Church of God and the Plain and Simple Truth Ministries and by the Free Will Offerings tithes and donations of those who are listeners of this podcast and are supporters of this great work of God. The preceding program has been a Plain and Simple Truth Ministries presentation.